Hello everybody and welcome back. My name's Deborah Hatswell. Thank you very much for joining me today while I share some of the case files from BBR Investigations. Before I start tonight's podcast, I'd like to make a shout out to my listeners on Podbean. I want you to know I can see your comments and your awesome reviews, but I've been locked out of my Podbean account since 2020, which means I can't reply. I've tried and there's no way around it. I'm trying to fix the problem with support, but please check out my contact details in the description and get in touch that way. Now for tonight's episode: the spaceman, the Coppel Dwarves, and the red-eyed monster of Wigan. Tonight, I'm sharing with you some really unusual reports from my home region in Lancashire. Now, Lancashire folk are known for ribbing each other over the towns that we live in. Wigan's no exception. There is a saying that Wiganers have a very posh sandwich, which is a pie between two slabs of a barm cake, or a bap for anyone who's not local. It's also called a Wigan kebab. We have a good sense of humour, and in serious times it held us in good stead. Wigan folk are hard-working and honest and not known for flights of whimsy. So when a local person opens up to me about something that they cannot explain, I listen and I take note. There is something about the land there that's strange. You can't quite put your finger on it, but it's there all the same. Like an undercurrent or a vibration you suddenly hear more clearly from time to time. There are so many strange reports there that it would take me all day to share them with you. So I've put a small selection together as an example of what gets reported in these parts. A recent case that you haven't heard before came in to me from a gentleman who contacted me through WhatsApp. He wanted to share that experience with me, and it was an area that I know quite well. And it involves the case of a strange mystery spaceman that vanished and the evil dwarves of Coppel. So just a short drive from me, across the mining land from my home, is a very small mining village of Coppel that many years ago was a place where several young boys encountered a mystery-running figure and were warned off from playing on the land due to the evil dwarf said to inhabit the mine workings there. I spoke to one of the boys at length. He's now an adult in his 50s, of course, and he was happy for me to share his experience with you all. He said, "This experience happened to me and my friends about 45 years ago now, and I've never forgotten it. I think it happened in 1976 or 77. There was myself, who was the youngest, and my older brother and two of our friends, who were also brothers, and we were aged between 6 and 9. The two brothers lived on Broadhurst Lane in Wrightington, which was about half a mile from our house. They had a lot of land, and we would spend all our time playing there. We'd go after school and on weekends every time we could. They had motorbikes and all kinds of fun stuff at their place, and they lived close to Coppel Moor. And when you ventured off their land, you were surrounded by woods. On one of those woods was Chisnell Woods. The day this happened, it was a lovely day. We were walking, looking down into the valley, and we stopped. We stopped because all four of us could see a man running down the valley, heading to the bottom. He had a bit of distance on us, I'd say about 100 yards or so. He was a big bloke, and he seemed massive to us. And he was running, and as he did so, he went into a copse of trees. We stood there a bit confused when, within seconds, smoke began to rise up out of the trees and into the air. It wasn't ordinary smoke. It had a green tinge to it. We were looking at each other with startled faces, and for some reason, we decided to follow him in. We would have been able to see him, as the trees were quite opened up in there, and we couldn't see him anywhere. There was also no sign of the smoke or a fire of any kind. We were really shocked. We looked and just didn't see him. We all said at once that it must have been a UFO that had taken off. I don't know where that thought came from, to be honest, but that's what it felt like to us. We didn't see a craft or anything. It was more the way he vanished and the smoke was rising upwards. For all it was the 1970s and there had been talk about UFOs, we were kids, and kids from a working class town, and it wasn't something we talked about between ourselves. We never mentioned them before then. But it felt right to us that he had simply gone into the trees and taken off. I don't remember any clothing on him. All I can say was that he was white in colour. It's so long ago now, and I try to remember small details, but they fade over time. What I remember concentrating on was seeing a man running down the valley and disappearing into a cluster of trees, and then this greenish smoke rising upwards. We were asking each other, "Did you see that?" And we talked about it all day. We all went home and told our parents, and they laughed and didn't take us seriously. But us kids talked about it from time to time. And 45 years on, it's still very clear in my mind. Yet as a group, we've not talked about it openly as adults. It's different for each of us, but I have a real need to know what he was doing. What did we see that day? We still played down there. It didn't scare us away. One other time we were down there, two of the girls who lived on the neighbouring farm said something to us that was really strange. Towards the bottom of the valley, there are some old abandoned mine buildings, wells and tunnels and structures made of brick, and they were old and all grown over. We were down there messing about one day when the two sisters who lived on that land spoke to us on the way out, and they just happened to say to us, "You don't walk there, do you? Because you don't want to do that." And we said, "Yeah, why?" And they both said, "Oh, you don't want to play down there. We've seen dwarves in those tunnels and woods, and they're evil." They went on to describe what they looked like. They said they were small and really fierce looking. We were really shocked, and we didn't want to believe them. So they got one of the other lads who lived on the land to explain, and he said the same thing. So we stayed away from that part of the valley. But it's only a couple of 100 yards away from where we saw the spaceman. I know the land our witness is talking about. I have relatives in Parbold and Appley Bridge that have lived there out on the farmland for generations. It's one of the places I'd ride with my granddad. Back then, it seemed like 1,000 miles away, as you had to use the A roads then before the motorways were built. It always felt like going on holiday to me. Now it's 9 minutes drive. In a part with my car, and a beautiful one at that. The land, however, is underrun with mining tunnels, and sadly hundreds of men died in disasters all across the northwest of England. It's also an area that has many weird experiences from strange red-eyed creatures, and so many UFO accounts that there are far too many to share. Now, if we pop across to Skelmersdale, there is a local rumour of angry dwarfs that supposedly tried to kill 3 children on the mining land. And all this land connects. Above, it's small pockets of housing, nature reserves and golf courses. It stretches for miles in all directions, even down to Bewhill, where I saw my strange creature. In fact, Bewhill Manor was the old mining museum in its day. In a place called Crank Caverns, also known as Rainford Delf Quarry, there is a very strange local legend of the angry dwarves in the mine. Crank Caverns sits on private property. It's been owned since the 18th century. The legend says that these caves were once the haunt of several angry dwarfs that were known to kill local children. So much fear was found that soldiers were brought in after 3 local boys were chased by these dwarfs. Those soldiers investigated the quarry and found human remains in the cave. That section was soon sealed by either a natural rockfall or gunpowder, depending on who you ask. Do you know anything about this legend, if you're in the northwest like I am, or any mention of the dwarfs in the northwest of England? Please get in touch. I'd love to know more, and I'd love to be able to pass it on to my witness. Crank Caverns is believed to have been used at one time as a game reserve and also an ammunition storage facility during the Second World War. So it's been military owned at some point. Today, due to its instability and health and safety, it's not a difficult place to get to, but it is not officially open to the public. You can still be seen via the footpath, but I wouldn't advise anyone to venture in there. One local Facebook group was filled with reports from locals who knew of the legends of the dwarves or had strange experiences themselves when they were in the caverns. Samantha Ashton said, "I heard that there's a tunnel that takes you to Billinge Hill, that there's a church down there, and that's where the goblins are from. My husband went in a bit further than I managed, which was literally up to the little gate. I don't like confined spaces, and I didn't like it in there. I think the church she's referring to is known as the cathedral down there, and I think that's because in caving terms, a cathedral is a huge cave. Catherine Barnes said, "My granddad was a gamekeeper after the war, and the family lived in the White House, you can see, as it went with the job. It seemed to be haunted, because a door would slam and footsteps would be heard crossing the room at night, but nobody was ever there." Maureen Coomer said, "We visited a few years ago. It's very eerie and a little spooky, but good to go and see. There's lots of videos on lives of people's ventures through those tunnels. The story of the little boys being chased by dwarfs has also been speculated on, and in the 1930s, a group of reporters went down into those tunnels to look for the dwarves. The young boys that saw the spaceman mentioned no noise with that incident, and they didn't see any lights or anything that. They only saw the smoke, and close to the area there are several reports of silent crafts seen by locals that have been reported for decades. In fact, there are probably around 30 reports of strange lights in the sky and silent crafts. My husband also saw a UFO and experienced a missing time event close to this area in the early 1990s on the site of the old yew tree pit. What is it about mining land that brings these strange anomalies? Many of these witnesses speak of the UFO's sharp, quick motion, and one detail stood out to me was the mention of Winter Hill. I think that area may be the source of this activity. I just can't prove it. But over the years, I've noticed an increase in the number of crafts and lights that are seen and reported between Jodrell Bank and the transmitter at Winter Hill. A Black Triangular UFO was seen and reported by a local man in Red Rock, Wigan, which is less than 2 kilometres as a crow flies. It was in the early evening, around 7 p.m, on Thursday the 12th of March 2010, and this man, whose name was Trevor, 67, lives alone in a narrowboat between Red Rock and Adlington, and he saw the strange craft when he was testing the engine on his boat, and he said, "I was testing the engine on my boat, making my way along the Leeds-Liverpool Canal from the direction of Chorley towards Wigan, when I spotted it. It was as I approached the Red Rock area near Wigan that I noticed a small black triangular-shaped object hovering over the canal, not far from the Crawford Arms public house. At first, thinking it was just a plane, I didn't pay much attention to it, and I got on with my chore. However, as I got closer to the object, I started to feel very uneasy, as I couldn't hear any engine noises coming from the object. Fearing that this thing was about to crash, I steered the boat to the canal bank and made sure I was safe. As I continued to watch the craft, I noticed what appeared to be like a fat hosepipe dangling from its underbelly that went into the water. Overcoming my initial fear, I started to run towards the triangle, and as I did so, the tube shot upright into it. It banked to the left and swiftly moved off in the direction of Winter Hill. I was flabbergasted. I ran back to my boat and tried to take stock on what I'd seen. I then, for some reason, started to feel drowsy, and I went into the boat to rest, only waking up at 10 a.m. the following morning. Previously, I have always gotten out of my bed before 6 a.m. I told a couple of my friends about what happened, but they only laughed at me. So I decided to contact a local UFO investigator, as I'd seen his phone number in one of the local newspapers. The investigator said, "After a long chat, I found him to be very rational and level-headed, although a bit of a loner. He said that even though he had travelled all over the place, he'd never seen anything like this before in his life." Then, several young girls saw a craft moving over Appley Bridge, Wigan. One young girl named Samantha contacted the Wigan UFO blog and shared her experience with a craft that she couldn't identify. Now, there's no date listed for this account in the blog, which was written in 2010, so I'm unsure when this happened. But Samantha said it was a clear night. Myself and 3 friends were just about to drive out of our street in Appley Bridge, Wigan, when one of my friends spotted a strange object up in the sky. We all looked up, and there, behind the trees, was an unexplainable craft that started moving upwards. Then it shot to the side in a zigzagging manner over nearby Back Lane. Within a few seconds, it had gone out of sight. The object looked like a triangle, or even a hexagon, I say triangle because it had three very powerful searchlights in the shape of a triangle underneath the craft, and there were about 6 rotating red lights in a hexagon formation. It wasn't a helicopter, as it was far too big, and we never seen an aircraft fly so low before. Besides, there was no sound. It was like nothing, anything that we'd ever seen before. Now, the boys mentioned smoke rising from the trees, which is why they thought the running man they saw maybe a spaceman. Now, there's another report of a strange smoky substance in a Wigan woodland not too far away, but this smoke was really harmful. And another case of a strange smoky substance that was added by the writer of the UFO blog himself, and he said, I was in the living room of my house talking to a friend about ordinary everyday things, when suddenly I thought I saw smoke and mist start to appear in the corner of the room. It then changed its appearance to look more like fine snow that was falling. It looked like glittering, shimmering snowflakes. I said to my friend that I thought there was a fire or something, and he shouted, No, it's something to do with you and your UFOs. The next moment, we both began to slowly fall backwards to the floor, as if on strings, and I began to experience a horrible, anesthetic type feeling come over me. I then thought I saw my friend being lifted up and taken away by some people. I couldn't see very well. I couldn't see them because of the shimmering light. I thought to myself, oh no, not again. I'm not going. I began to fight the feeling, and suddenly I heard a gentle voice in my head saying, It's okay. It's okay. Tell me, are you an intelligent life form? And I replied, Yeah, so leave me and my friend alone. The voice then said, Okay, it's okay, we understand. Things then started to appear to return to normal. He said he began to recover and sat down in a daze. As soon as he regained his senses, he said, I found that I had somehow got into bed and it was daybreak. Rushing to the phone, I contacted my friend and I found him in a similar state. To this day, I cannot remember how he got home or I got into my bed. Remains a complete mystery. Now, there was another mist, a strange white mist, that was said to have injured a dog. In one of the local forums in Wigan, a young man shared an experience that happened to his uncle in Wigan, close to Crook Hall, and he said, My uncle was taking the dog for a walk in Crook Village when he saw a patch of white, misty smoke. The dog ran into the patch of white stuff. Next minute, the dog started to bark, and when he returned to my uncle, there were bits of flesh missing from his body. And just after that, the white mist disappeared. A man in nearby Worsley Green, Wigan, saw a strange, large, square-shaped craft with 6 rows of lights. I think that's what Samantha described a little earlier. Mr. Cyril Wilde was gazing out of his bedroom window one morning when he described seeing something that he couldn't put into words. His description was it was a large shaped craft with 6 rows of 6 lights across each side. The craft appeared to hover in the air. It stayed stationary for quite a while before starting to move slowly away. A short while later, it was joined by another object that travelled slowly towards the first before moving off together. The whole episode lasted for over an hour. The land that all these reports have been taken on, happened on, or experienced on, should I say, above, it's all mining land. There are so many old shafts, they've been filled as ponds now and stocked with fish. You just wouldn't know if you didn't know the history of the place. It doesn't look like mining land, is what I'm trying to say. The old sack heaps have gone to nature. It's the type of land people use for leisure every day. So, they walk the dogs there, or they take their watercraft out on the lodges, or they fish. At night, it feels different. But it is a haven for anglers, whether at night or day, and you do get a lot of night fishermen. And I think it's something that happens all across the UK, but it is particularly popular in my area. Now, local anglers said that they saw several UFOs. A number of triangle-shaped crafts were seen by 2 men who were out for a bit of fishing beside a small lake in the Coppel area. The men described the crafts that they saw, as being at least 200 feet long. They had no markings and they were matte black in colour. They also said there were at least 5 of these objects, all in view and all seen at the same time. No sound was heard from the craft, even though they were no more than a couple of thousand feet above them. In all, the sighting lasted for 3 minutes, at which time a couple of dark coloured helicopters approached the area, causing the triangles to vanish. As I said earlier, these are just a selection of the weird UFO reports that concentrate in that area. There are UFO abductions, tales of men in black. But what about the evil dwarfs? Now, over the years, there have been mention of the odd creature or two on that mining land. Always described differently by each witness, they come in all shapes, sizes and colours. I don't know if the figures seen are related in any way, or are they unique in their own right. I honestly don't know. But as a witness to a horrifying thing, I do have a number of witnesses in the area that have made their own reports of strange creatures, and I understand how they feel. One man described what he saw as wild humans. Now, Dave's a local man, and he contacted me several months ago in the summer of 2023. Like other locals, he wanted to report something that he'd seen that he can't explain, and I rang him to chat with him while he did explain. He said, I wanted to chat with you, Deb, about a number of anomalies I've noticed, and I had some really strange experiences after visiting Elmnut Woods in Wigan. The incident I'd like to inform you about started in spring of 2021. I've been experiencing weird stuff since I was 4 years of age. I'm 50 now. But dealing with this alone is getting to be too much. I'm ex-army. I spend many hours out in nature. The woodlands are where I feel at home. I understand the rhythm of the woods. In towns, I feel like a different person. I work at night, so really in the morning I'd walk my dog in the woods. I started to find these structures made from tree branches. Some of the branches were quite thick in diameter. They were always broken, no tool marks, no footprints in the soft mud around them. I saw no evidence of a campfire or any human debris. In fact, I didn't see anything that looked human-made at all. Some of these structures would vanish or appear almost overnight. I have also heard a strange call on 9 occasions when I've been out there. Somehow I was shouted at by a disembodied voice, and it said the word Yod. A simple internet search revealed to me this word is from an ancient language meaning go or went, and the voice was really deep and gravelly. I also had a stone or something thrown at me at the same time. I heard the stone land in front of me, but I couldn't find it. I realised that this might have been a cue for me to leave, which is what I did. I remember it was 19th of July 2022. Due to my night job, I'm often out and about 2 or 3 a.m. It's usually beautiful out in the woods, and it's much cooler during the night, and I never see any people. They're usually tucked up in bed. Elmnut Woods has 2 mine shafts within it, and sometimes when I'm in the area, I get a strange feeling in my chest, like I know something's around. I don't know how to explain it. It just happens, as natural as having a pee. There is also a waterfall known as the Fairy Beck, and out in the middle, in waist-deep freezing water, there's a deliberate pile of stacked stones. Sometimes those stones would be stacked in a pyramid shape that'd change. You'd have to be lacking some senses to walk out into there to build a rock stack. It's filled with rocks and old stumps. In February 2021, I was with the dogs in the woods and I heard a strange tawny owl call. I'm an ornithologist, so I reckon I had bird sounds and habits. This sounded like someone trying to sound like an owl. A series of short whistles, and they were answered from 2 other parts of the wood. I noticed the dog reacting. One of them went on to point, and I thought it's best to leave, so that's what I did. On the back of that incident, I noticed a change in my dogs. I've always let them out for a wee as soon as I'm in from work in the early hours of the morning. At the back of my garden, there's a strip of woods that leads to open fields. As I'm waiting for the dogs, I heard this strange conversation. It was like 2 people talking. One male, deep voice, and a higher one, possibly a female or something younger. But it was not a language that I recognised. You could tell it was words and a conversation, but I couldn't tell you what they were saying. Luckily, I always carry a torch with me, so I went to the back fence and shined the torch where the voices were coming from. There was nothing. There's nobody there. My wife then let the dogs out later, and she heard a female voice. She went and looked across the fence, and she couldn't see anything. Then in March, we had a lot of bad weather and heavy rain. I was out following the deer tracks, and I saw one small footprint, a bare footprint. That was strange. I took my phone out to take a picture, and something told me not to do it. It was a strong urge, so I took note of it and put my phone away. The big toe on that print was at a strange angle, and for all it looked human, you could tell that it wasn't. There was just one print there in the soft mud. I was with my mate, and we had a walk up there a couple of weeks ago, about 1:20 in the morning. We both heard what I can only describe as a large metal door being slammed closed from inside a large piece of woodland. We're going to go back in daylight. I want to leave a noise recorder up there about 24 hours and see if I capture anything. I noticed Dave said the footprint was small. So something small's moving around out there on that land. Could it possibly be of any connection to the Dwarves on Broadhurst Lane or the ones at the caverns? I don't know. But I know it's not the only weird experience that happened down there, and not the only experience near some crags. A dog-like creature chased us. One lady who lives in Wigan, in the northwest of England, asked if I'd take her account from many years ago about something she experienced when she was a child. She explained that herself and a group of friends had gone to play as usual, where there was an old slit in the rocks in the woods. She described it as a small cave, woodland just off the River Dee. The cave had a low, wide opening, and the other children would go in, but she didn't. She wasn't comfortable in narrow spaces, so she always stayed outside with the dogs. On this one occasion, the dogs heard something in the woods, so they dashed in to investigate. She didn't mention what the dogs were, but she did say they were quite happy taking on an Alsatian, so I presume they were big dogs. She said she was shocked when they came running back to her less than a minute later. They both stayed put for a while, went to investigate another sound that caught their attention, and this time when they came back, they had their tails between their legs. By now, all of the children had re-emerged out of the cave. They'd all heard something moving in there that didn't sound right, and it spooked them. So as kids do, they ran. To go straight home would have to take them past the noise, so they had to run towards a golf club. And after a while, as they were running, they saw something she found impossible to explain up ahead of her. She called it it. She couldn't describe what it was, just that it was running towards them. It was 6 to 7 feet tall. It had broad shoulders and chest, and it was completely covered in hair. She said that as the dogs ran past the children, they had their tails between their legs and they left the kids behind. This is when she got really scared, and the kids turned and ran back the way they'd come. Thankfully, they didn't see anything else of the creature, but she remembered it clearly all these years later. I would love to trace this lady and the other children with her, as the details she left are pretty scant. Plus, the creature she saw was 7 feet tall, so it's not one of the dwarves that the boys are talking about. In our next report, we also hear from 3 local boys who were terrified one night out on the old pit lodges that are used for locals for fishing. And this is the Perch Man of Hindley. This report comes from Kev. He said, "Hi Deb, it's been a long time since we spoke, and it's took me a long time to contact you. I've gone back and forth on whether I should report this for a very long time now. I have some confusion about an event I had way back in the 80s when I was 12 or 13. But after a long illness, I've decided to share what happened in the hopes that somebody local may be able to shine some light on what happened to us that night. I lived in Hindley area, Wigan, and as kids we'd go down to Deep Pit, as it was called locally. The area is made up of old mine shafts that are now filled with water that people use as fishing holes. We call them lodges. It's greenbelt land. The area is mainly made up of grassland, some small woodlands, and lots of land left to nature, set on the edge of a small town. I remember when this happened, it was the end of summertime, and it was really, really hot. That night I was with 2 of my friends, and one of them suggested we'd head over to Deep Pit and see who was out night fishing. We were at a bit of a loss for something to do,
but I was a bit reluctant due to the local tale of the Perch Man. People would say, don't go down there, oh, Perch Man will get you. The Perch Man is said to have had red eyes and gills, and everyone here says it, and they always have. But with a bit of peer pressure, and with one good torch and my small one between all three of us, that's where we headed. It was only around 10 p.m, but it had already gone dark. There's no lighting down there, so it's pretty dark anyway. We headed to the square lodge as usual, and there was quite a few people out fishing. That night, there was just this one chap sitting on his own there, though. He was fishing on the square lodge on his own. My friend's shining his torch, and the old chap told him off as he'd scare fish. My friend put his torchlight to the ground, and we headed over to Deep Pit. The Deep Pit was bubbling away, and it was really dark. There was no wind that night. Now, the Deep Pit is dangerous, and many people have lost their lives there. The water's black, and it's freezing cold below the surface, and all you can see in the distance are the lights of the cars driving along the lane. There's an old railway embankment and a golf course. The water in the pit makes a popping noise, and we saw a lot of fish in there. We started to walk around the lodge, just talking and taking our time as it was dark, and there was a large tree in the tree line. It wasn't a sapling, but a good sturdy Y-shaped tree, and something suddenly started shaking it. There was no mistaking what was happening. The tree was being shaken from side to side, which honestly was impossible. At first, we thought it was someone playing a trick on us. Why we thought that, I don't know, but that's what we told ourselves. We didn't hear any jeering laughter or any feet running away, just a violent shaking of that tree. It made like a woof, woof, over and over, side to side. Other than the tree moving, everything else out there was silent. And even though we were scared, we still went over to the tree to see if anyone was hiding there. When we got to the tree, there was nobody in sight. And at this point, I remembered I was so shook up. I weighed up the fact that I was bigger than my mates and could probably beat them out of there if we ran. That's how scared I was. I set off running for home, and even though I was running flat out, one of my friends ran past me. I was running full pedal, and he was moving even quicker. We didn't stop running until we got to the main road. I was shaking. I couldn't work out what had happened or how it had happened. I told myself it was someone playing a trick on me. But inside, all these years on, I know that's not what happened. Because that tree was not a spindly, weak thing. It was a thick, Y-shaped tree, and it was moving from side to side, and nothing could be seen there moving it. There was no gang of other kids, no adult shaking the tree, and certainly no machine or tractor moving it. Over the years, we've mentioned it to each other, and we've asked other mates if they've experienced anything weird down there. And one of my mates said one day he was on the Woocher, which is another local place, where there's a huge slag heap, and it's all overgrown, left to nature. My friend was with his brother and another lad, and they were out on their off-road bikes, and they saw a large hairy set of legs up in the tree. They were so scared that they left as fast as they could. Could those hairy legs be connected to the tree shaking, Deb? Now, there are lots of reports here from people finding dead deer remains in the area too. Is there a connection between the deer remains that are being found, the tree shaking, and the strange creatures reported in the area? Are the mine pits and tunnels the homes of creatures unknown? Are the dwarves spotted in the area some kind of wild human or an ET of some kind? There are thousands of miles of tunnels below our feet that we seldom give thought to. It's only when you start to see all of the experiences in one town that you realise there are far more than we ever imagined. Those mines spread out all across the northwest, and there are reports exactly like these in all of those areas, from red-eyed creatures, bear men, tall upright werewolves, yellow-eyed things. You'd be amazed at the number of reports that span out from Winter Hill in all directions. Next week, I'm sharing an interview with a chap named Andy, who was followed home after a terrifying encounter he had whilst walking his dog. Now, Andy's witnessed so many things in life that his interview comes in two parts. Some of the things we discuss are raw and quite frightening, but that is the real truth of what I do, and that's how we should share it. Some things are hard to hear, and in the coming weeks we'll hear from several people who are seemingly in the same situation as Andy. They too are experiencing things happen at home. So many people are reporting visits and activity increasing around their homes. I am unsure what to do with this. So much so, I have noticed a dramatic upcline. And lastly, I'll be bringing you a whole host of new experiences around this subject from the BBR case files. Stick with me for news of 2 new upcoming YouTube channels. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm Deborah Hatswell, and you've been listening to the BBR case files. Good night, everyone.